the issue that the African Union has in the past not hesitated to criticize Israeli international law violations and occupation of Palestinian lands. But despite this, we do know that the chairperson of the African Union Commission, Musa Faki Mohammed, has condemned Israel's war on Gaza and its violent attacks against Palestinians in Jerusalem. So, why on earth did the Commission grant Israel the privilege of an observer status at the AU just 2 months later? Assalamu alaikum, Naeem Jeenah. Welcome to the program. And quite baffling, when these people make decisions. They, on the one hand, support Palestine. On the other hand, they make take decisions which confounds you. Naeem Jeenah, are you there? Okay, we seem to have lost Naeem Jeenah. We will just try reconnecting. 12 after 9 o'clock, still to come on the show. We will be talking with Dewald van Rensburg. He's a reporter at the Amabungani Center for Investigative Journalism. And we will be wrapping up with a chat to the women leadership in the global halal industry. That's also coming up on the show. But let's just see what has happened to Naeem Jeenah. I think he's there now. Naeem Jeenah, assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the program.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I don't know, I just disappeared.
Yeah, I just wondered. I thought you're dropping me again as usual.
I don't do that normally.
Okay, Ma, for that. I know that if and when you are available, you're always here to assist us and give us insights into issues impacting, the Northern African and Middle East regions, very especially the Palestinian issue. I don't know if you heard my introduction to the interview.
I did.
All right. So do you want to respond to it, Naeem? I don't want to repeat myself.
Sure. Look, I think the point here is that the Israelis have been working extremely hard on the continent for decades, trying to win over individual countries, etc. And the fact that the AU comes out with statements and comments that are very strongly pro-Palestinian, very strongly critical of Israel, it seems that from the Israeli perspective, it doesn't really care about the resolution as long as it gets action on its side. So we could, for example, expect that in the final resolutions of this weekend's summit, there might be a resolution or part of a resolution that is strongly condemnatory of Israel and Israeli conduct. But still, in terms of the issue of Israel's status in the AU, ultimately the decision went in its favor. So Israel has been working on particular countries to ensure that this will happen. And so we now know that last year, July, when the AU Commission Chair, Musa Faki, granted Israel its new status, its accreditation, he was supported and pushed by the DRC, by Morocco, and Rwanda in particular, who kind of, if you like, worked with him behind the scenes to ensure that this happened. And in yesterday's, last night's debate, we saw also a number of other countries that supported that position, as we did in October at the Executive Council meeting. So these states might adopt a resolution that, as I say, condemns Israel. But on the practical issue, this is the situation. And at a practical level, many of these states also have very strong bilateral relations with Israel. And for many of the more authoritarian states on the African continent, they look to Israel from whom they can purchase weapons, surveillance equipment, often used against their own citizens, spying technology, intelligence services, etc. So there's a gain for some of these states in supporting Israel at this level.
So, really, it's about these African and Arab leaders who appease Israel, um, possibly also as a way to reach out to the United States, because they reckon that Israel has major sway in Washington, as we all know, and maybe of some help to influence the decision of the world superpower in their favor.
Oh, no, this is very true. This is the case with some of the states that believe that they can win favor in Washington through Israel. Um, it is often a fallacious kind of position, except in the Trump era. In the Trump era, it was clear that developing relations with Israel won you favors in Washington. And so we saw, for example, that Morocco normalized its relations with Israel, and in return, Trump granted recognition to Morocco over the colonized area of Western Sahara. Something that's not in line with international law. Similarly, with Sudan, Trump said that if Sudan normalized relations with Israel, then it would be taken off the U.S. List of sponsors of terrorism, etc. So it was very obvious in the when Trump was president, less obvious at other times, but that is a motivation for some of these states that they feel that the road to Washington is through Israel.
So, outright opportunism as far as these states are concerned, sadly. So, really, in other words, US leaders have encouraged and continue to encourage such malpractice. Obviously, no less with the present administration, which, on the one hand, claims to put human rights at the center of its foreign policy. So it does, in fact, speak with a forked tongue, does it not? That's Washington.
It does. Sorry, I didn't hear the last sentence.
Absolutely opportunistic, and the
Yes.
current administration obviously encourages these type of double dealings with African Mid-Eastern leaders, and on the other hand they are supposedly strong supporters of human rights as far as their foreign policy is concerned. So really
Hmm.
double standards here, not only by the US, but it seems to have become a general practice all around the world with the majority of leaders. I kind of sit back and think which country or which leader isn't playing the political game by double standards.
Yeah, no, certainly opportunism in the case of in this particular case that we're talking about, in the case of African leaders and African governments and elites, and many of them kind of play the political game for their own self-interest. We know about what that means in South Africa, of course, for the self-interest, not even the national interest. And as for U.S. and European as well, frankly, double standards on human rights, etc. I mean, one only needs to look at the role that the U.S. plays in various parts of the world, whether it's in Europe or in parts of Africa, in the Middle East, in the Far East, whatever the case might be. On the African continent, for example, the role of the U.S. Africa Command, the military structure on the continent, is very pervasive and often very destructive, and again used as leverage with various African states. So that is the kind of thing that we, in a sense, expect. There are very few countries in the global south generally, but talking about Africa, very few countries that are willing to stand up against that. it seems that South Africa is one of them. I mean, on this particular issue of Israel in the AU, the loudest voices and ones campaigning the strongest against Israel's accreditation is South Africa and Algeria, along with Namibia and Nigeria, but Algeria and South Africa being the strongest. So there are only a handful of countries that are willing to buck that trend and willing to displease Washington. But most of the others, one favors from Washington rather than willing to go against them.
So, Naeem, let's look at the matter at hand, and that is um, Israel's observer status at the AU. What benefit is it to Israel to have this observer status, and how will it disadvantage the AU or the member states, so to speak?
So for Israel, there's a few advantages. One is that non-African states that are accredited to the AU have certain privileges. They are able to attend opening and closing sessions of all major meetings, such as this weekend summit, executive council meetings, etc. They can't attend closed meetings, but the open meetings. Now, that's not as innocent as it sounds, because physical presence at these conference venues is often more useful in terms of lobbying than being in the hall. Many of the deals and influencing takes place in the corridors and in the lobbies of hotels rather than in the hall. So it gives them a presence to be able to do those kinds of things. And to ensure that decisions that the AU makes are in its favor. But secondly, that Israel has been for decades wanting to break the bloc mentality by which Africa votes in multilateral fora like the United Nations, particularly the UN General Assembly, where if African states are against a particular resolution, that means you've got 54 votes against that resolution or for that resolution, whatever the case might be. This has not been good for Israel because, in general, the whole of the African continent, all 54 states, would vote against Israel in the General Assembly in particular. And so Israel has wanted to break that. This will help it to do that not only at the GA, but also in the UN Human Rights Council, other places, etc. And thirdly, that it believes that it will enhance its bilateral relations with various states. Already, its bilateral relations with a number of states is extremely strong. South Africa is perhaps one of the only ones where Israel's bilateral relations are actually deteriorating rather than improving. And of course, a few states where there's no movement in those relations, like with Algeria, there's no diplomatic or any other relations. But it believes that those bilateral relations will increase, and the bilateral relations means not just diplomatic, but in particular trade, and in particular arms dealing and spyware and all of those kinds of things. I mean, I'm sure we remember, just a few months ago, the big scandal about the Pegasus Israeli software, which even the UN, even the US rather, has blacklisted the company, the Israeli company that makes it. That spyware was used in most African countries against their own citizens, but we know that it was also used to infect our president's phone by elements in the Rwandan government. So these are the kinds of things that Israel wants to be able to use to sell to African states and thereby increase its influence on the continent.
Now, having said all of that, Naeem, let's look at Musa Faki Mohammed. And we do know that he was just recently re-elected in that leadership position for another 4-year term by a majority of the African states. What has he, is he playing the game here? Because obviously he wants something from Washington or the Israelis. And is he now, his re-election, is it, is he safe in that position? Do you think that they might ask him to step down? Those states that have opposed the Israeli observer status at the AU?
It's highly unlikely that they will ask him to step down. It would be a major kind of breach with tradition to do that. And also that I'm frankly not sure that the majority of African states want him to step down. So I think he will be there for the next 3 years. But your first question is, what does he get out of it? Immediately, not so much out of the Israelis or the Americans, but certainly it seems he has been made promises, most likely by certain African states, particularly Morocco, Rwanda. As I said, the three that backed him fully in his decision, or before he made the decision to accredit Israel, DRC, Morocco, and Rwanda. Now, Moussa Faki, when his 4-year term, he has 3 years left, as I said, as AU Commission chair is over, he wants to go back to Chad and he wants to contest elections for presidency. And for that, he'll need a lot of support. And outside support with muscle will definitely help. And for that, he will rely on countries like Morocco, which would be able to probably bankroll his campaign, Rwanda as well. So this seems to be the main motivation for him. After that, of course, if he does become president of Chad, we probably will see that he'll be rewarded by the Israelis with deals, etc. But for now, he's eyeing that presidency of his home country.
Okay, that is then the dirty tricks of politics and what's in it for me, the AU and Israelis observer status. Naeem Jeenah, Executive Director of AMEC, thank you indeed for your deep insights into this matter. Shukran. Until the next time, as always, salamu alaikum to you. 9:29 exactly, news and views on Salam Media.